helper.
I took the lights out because my tractor takes them out for me if I don't take them out first. So this very well might be the last record of the inside of this barn. We don't have squares, so she has to tear apart round bales for now. Well, this is the beginning of a new year for me. Pretty much done the things I was supposed to get done last year. And I figured for a bit of a celebration of sorts, I'll build me a saw. The way I want a saw to be built. Basically an original edition style build, you know. A 2171 is pretty much the equivalent of a 372 original edition. No X-torque, none of that stuff. Just a good, solid top end. Piston port. No goofy stuff, you know. And it's a combination of new parts and old parts, which is pretty much the theme of the channel, isn't it? Have a new OEM carburetor. Filter holder. Intake boot. That's from Husqvarna. I like those aluminum brackets better than the OEM ones. Again, OEM cases, red. OEM top end, gaskets, seals, you know, all that stuff, all OEM, crank. Even an OEM fuel line. How do you like that? And on a used handle, red, tray. I'm debating on the clutch. I might put a new clutch in there. Pull starts. I'll use whichever one looks nicer. Oh, look at that. I'm going to use that one. I got a variety of covers, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to use. And one of the things you got to do when you start doing stuff like this is basically make sure you have all the parts and all the screws required to make that build happen. And sometimes it's more difficult than you realize because there's just a lot of little stuff. So what I'm going to do here is very quickly go through the list of parts that I have. And boy, I wish I could speed the video up so it doesn't kill a lot of time. But you got the cases and the bearings, right? But you have to have the 6 case screws, seals, that little O-ring that goes underneath that collar on the crank, plus that washer, so these are parts, crankshaft, right? That consists of the bottom end. Tank handle, but in addition to the tank handle, you need the fuel line, tank vent, this one has one, but also the anti-vibe springs, on-off switch with the proper wiring, obviously the trigger and safety and spring. That's your tank handle, throttle cable, pins to hold the controls in. Just a lot of stuff. Did I mention gaskets for the cases? And carburetor, intake boot, bracket, filter holder. You also need the proper carburetor screws. See them? And you also need those little red sleeves, and that's something a lot of people forget. They're kind of like plastic spacers to make sure that the screws are a slip fit. And another piece that people sometimes forget and don't show up often on the aftermarket saws are those inside steel rings to support that intake boot. Very important. So of course this hooks into, on the tray, throttle cable comes up through there, so that's part of the tank handle. I don't know what you call that, but it sits on the case and deflects air from the flywheel up into the air box. You see how this stuff begins to pile up? You know, pull start with the screws, and somewhere around here there's got to be a little top hat that goes underneath that one. Where's that little bugger? There it is, see it? See, a little part like that, you know, if you don't have that, or a little washer like this that goes on the end of the crank, it can stop your whole build. Oh, I need a sprocket, don't I? Maybe I better get a sprocket. Not an 8. I know there's a bunch of people that'll swear up and down that a 8-tooth sprocket is a good deal for these 372s, but I don't think so. I think a 7 is what you want. Let it rev, you know. So, and there's going to be a clip somewhere. There's got to be a little circlip that holds that onto the end of the crank. I got some more clutch parts over here. So that's the clutch. But then you have things like the chain brake, the handle, the chain brake assembly with a spring and a band. You know, I got a new one of these. And with the oil pump, you have the oil pump, the screws for it, this little brass deal, and then there's that little rubber piece that goes on the end. That can be a real pain to find. And then this covers chain brake stuff. That should go by the carburetor, I guess. And I guess the point is, oh yeah, anti-vibe for the side of the cylinder. Goes right there. Need to find one of those. You know, flywheel. Flywheel has to have the parts for the pull start. You need a muffler. You need a muffler gasket. You need a heat shield. That cover. See if I can find a heat shield. Ah, heat shield. Goes by the muffler. Gonna find the muffler bolts, you know. And I guess where I'm bucking spike. How can I forget the bucking spike? I guess the point is that all this stuff adds up. And before you start putting something together, pretty much it's a good idea to get all the parts laid out to make sure you have everything. There's nothing worse than getting partway through the build and having to put the saw on the side because of some foolish part. You know, it could be a screw for the grounding wire, something like that, where it keeps you from assembling the saw, you know, and sets you on one of those frustrating waiting periods, and then you start stacking projects that are partially done, and next thing you know, you look like my shop. So what I think I'm going to do now is assemble the cases and put the handle on there, and maybe do the top end and carburetor and call that a video. Pickup tube for oil pump. Where's an oil? Oh, here's an oil pump. This is a 372 X torque piston. This is a 371 piston single ring. You notice it's quite a bit shorter. Now you can see it's quite a bit shorter. This is a crank from an earlier original edition Husqvarna. Note the inside diameter. This is a crank from a much later one. Notice the inside diameter of that pin. If you don't see the implications, I'm not going to tell you. But that's yet another wrinkle about just swapping top ends from original edition over to X Torx. This crank here is probably well balanced with an X Torq piston, which is much larger, right? Pretty much sold all my tools, so I'm going to have to go back and use the shop tools. They're not bad, you know. Alright, I have to use my stuff. There we go. That freed it right up. Alright, let me get the case screws in there. Let me get this stuff out of the way. Look at that. So there's no seals in there right now, so that thing is just pretty free spinning, and that's the way it should be, with no seals. When I put the seals in there, there's going to be a fair amount of seal tension, and then it won't turn quite as easily. Well, just to review, what I did was I put that little piece of plastic, that white piece of plastic behind the spring, set that spring detent right there in, then I put the chain brake band to see how it goes in there. This goes over, that goes under. I put grease all in here, a pin for that to rotate on right here. I don't know if you saw me do that. I'm doing a lot of here's and there's and stuff like that. Put this on next, and then use a small screwdriver to sort of leverage that detent back so I could push this straight down. Now, this is not tensioned properly, right? It's not quite ready to go. But before you go about setting that in there, make sure you have your 4 little screws and the cover, because once that goes in there, you need to get that cover on damn quick. Now, what I do, I just grab a hold of the spring like this. And use this modified spring tool right here. So I can just get to where I can push that down with my thumb, and then there's really no strain or pain. It goes. Now, at this point in time, get that cover on quick. Okay? And that really makes that job pretty painless, you know? Because sometimes that job can be a real pain in the neck. But using that brake spring tool, you can buy it at Napa or any of those places. And what I did is I made this hook a lot thinner for the smaller springs. You don't want to go too far with it. But I use this on those MS660 kits is where I developed that darn thing. Now, once the chain brake assembly is done, you know, we're pretty much down to block and tackle here to finish off this chainsaw, you know. Probably ought to rattle that clutch just a little bit. Just a little bit. Otherwise, the first time you fire it up, it's going to spin right off of there. Now you don't want to go too crazy, just a couple of rattles, because not only can you, if you go too much with an impact wrench on that crank, you can actually twist the 3 pressed together segments, one relative to the other, but you can sure wreck a starter, pull start too. So just give it a 1 wrap like that, and that's it, no more. I've got a way of doing that for a long time, so. Boy, it's got a lot of compression. I'm probably going to have to put a compression release on there. Now that the chain brake is on, let me finish up this side. First is this little rubber grommet. Like I said, I don't really care if this is a race-winning saw. It's really not the goal. But this is a saw that scratches my itches and nobody else's. Not particularly interested in how fast it goes, or whether it's faster than the other guy's saw, or any of that crap that typically drives why a person does a custom saw build. I want something that's red, Jonsered. That was requirement number 1. I like the lower RPM power band of the stock, not modified, a stock 372 XPW, right? So I prefer that top end. While I'm on this side, got all that together, let me just put the clutch on. I put a little grease on that bearing, and you see those slots, they got to capture the worm gear. And you can look straight down and just drop it right on there. When it's right, you'll hear it kind of rattle. Like that, see it? Well, I'm pretty far along in this project, and I think I'm going to take a quick pause because I've discovered there's some things that are different between 372 and 2171 that are going to require me to sort of rob some parts just so I can finish the saw. Okay? First, when you look at the difference between the Husqvarna series and the Jonsered, obviously it starts with the red cases, right? And we talked about that. The top ends were the same. Clutches, cranks, carbs. On the 2171, you had the low top filter holder because it doesn't have the tall filter that the 372 has. It has the short one. So that's going to be different between the Jonsered line and the Husky line. And obviously things like the pull start plastic and then the top cover plastic is different. You know, we've covered some of that as well. And obviously the different color on the side covers. One of the things that's different, that's very subtle, but stopped me right in my tracks, is chain brake parts. Now we talked about the handle spacing right here on the Jonsered is wider than it is on the Husqvarna. And the bar is a straight bar going across this way versus the angled bar. So the bar itself is different, right? And because the bar is different, they have a different chain brake handle. But what I didn't realize is that this piece right here, they call it the chain brake lever. This is different. And there's actually a different part number. This one is the 97008701. If it was a Jonsered, it would be a 02, and this is all different. So what I've got to do to finish off this saw, and then I'll just put this thing on hyperdrive so I can go out and run it some, is to take the chain brake lever from my 2172 and put it on here for now, and then just order a new one and get that back to going. But since I really want to get this saw up and running, I need to rob some parts from my 2172 right here. So I'm going to go about doing that. I'm going to have to use one of these melted ones for now. I found that one. I think that was ejected from one of my Chinese saws. We have a saw. A red saw. Of course the question is going to be, is it going to run? Let's see if I can find an air filter for it. And we'll put some gas in there and oil and fire it up and see. How's that? Alright, let's see if we can get this thing fired. See if I can even pull it over. Wow. That's better. let's see if we can figure out how to fatten this thing up a little bit. Yeah, start with doing that. And I know the smart asses out there are going to say, geez, it's going to run like a 372 XPW, right? Because that's what it is. But this is going to be my either go-to or backup work saw for a while. And what I'll do, and part of the hobby, is going through and getting a better top cover and a, you know, better pull start. And over time, when I find bits and pieces at dealers and things, I'll make it look like new. But right now, I just want to make it run. That's the goal. I think the high speed on that thing is just good right the way it is. I don't think I have to mess with that at all. You know? And blend a steel bar to this. I got a bunch of those totals that are steel mount. And they don't hold up for the guys who I normally sell them to. But we're going to use an adapter. See that little adapter right there? You get them online for, you know, 10, 12 bucks. I'll probably start making my own. I don't need to buy any. I can make those damn things. But I've got a bunch of these Total brand bars that no one's ever going to use but me, you know. And I've got them in steel mount. One of the things you have to do when you adapt, you have to take a little material from here, almost like a ½ an inch, so it'll actually go back far enough, you know, to the sprocket. And Oregon LGX. That won't be bad. This will be a good cut and saw. Let's see if it restarts. And there you have it.